Recipes for Grief, heartfelt storytelling for feely foodies. I'm your host, Andrea Sexton Dumas. Today on the podcast, we're joined by my friend and aunt, Marna Owen, who shares what she found after opening her mother's recipe folder while searching for traditional Romanian dishes. I didn't think to ask Marna more questions about this, but have you ever heard of his and hers refrigerators? Apparently that was a thing before the days of mom caves. And I've got to say, this conversation really left me reflective about poverty and gender-based societal restrictions and how those things shape, everything, but especially our relationship with food. Marna Owen is a transplanted Michigander who lives in Berkeley, California. She spent much of her career writing words for other people. Now, she's writing in her own voice, on her own topics, and learning a little jazz piano on the side. Marna, thank you so much for joining me on Recipes for Grief today.
Well, thank you for having me.
How have you been sleeping recently?
Well, funny you should ask, because last night I did not sleep very well at all. I was getting ready to fly to my current location, Portland, Oregon, from the Bay Area to take care of my son and daughter-in-law's cats. And we've been, as you know, we've been having crazy weather in the Bay Area. So there was a lot of rain last night. And before I fly, I'm always afraid I'm going to miss the plane and I won't hear my alarm and I won't get up in time. So I did not sleep very well last night. But other than that, I've been sleeping pretty well.
Okay. So you should sleep well tonight then.
I already took a nice long nap. So
nice.
Hopefully I will not, I'll be okay during this interview.
So, Marna, you wrote an essay about your mom's cookbook.
Yeah, it wasn't a cookbook per se. It was a folder, as many people have, a collection of recipes that my mother collected over time during her life. And it was something that I brought back with me from Michigan after my mother died, a keepsake, a memento, whatever you want to call it. And I put it away for a number of years. And when I found it and took it out, it started this thought journey for me. And I ended up writing a little memoir piece about my mother and food, her relationship with food, and what I had been expecting to find when I went through her recipes and what I in fact found, and kind of connected some dots with my mother's life and how I remember her being when I was growing up.
Do you have your essay with you? Would you like to read a little bit for us?
Recently, I found my mother's green recipe folder stuffed away in a chest of old books. I'd brought it with me from Michigan to California in 2006 after my mother's funeral. Perhaps still raw from losing her, I'd put it out of my sight and forgotten it. Now, holding the slender folder, I wondered why I'd chosen this thing over others to remember her by. I began to look through it, searching for ways to prepare stuffed cabbage, fried bread, and chicken soup, dishes that I remembered my Romanian grandmother and aunts making, but dishes that my mother never cooked herself, though she professed to love them. But the recipes that my mother collected did not reflect the old country of Transylvania. Rather, they echoed the Jolly Green Giant and Betty Crocker, who in the 1950s and 60s promised housewives improved culinary skills and more leisure time through the wonders of processed food. Instead of paprika, I found Bisquick and Cool Whip. I suddenly recalled a photo of my mother standing and smiling in her state-of-the-art 1950s kitchen, a kitchen imagined and built by my father, complete with double ovens and his and hers refrigerators. And then I remembered my mother always hated cooking. The recipe folder may have been her attempt to fit in, but it was not her.
Oh, Marna.
Yeah, so that is what I discovered in my rediscovery of her funny recipe folder and her funny recipes that she chose to cut out.
Wow. I'm feeling a lot of things in this moment. I'm feeling grief. I'm feeling annoyance at the American food industry. How did that make you feel when you started reading these recipes?
Yeah. Well, it's funny because, like I said, I think I I don't know why when I started going through them, I thought there would be this treasure trove of the old family recipes. Because as I said, my mother was not a cook. She she loved to make, let me rephrase that. She didn't love to make anything. So she would make the things that she made well were Toll House chocolate chip cookies and apple pie. And that's about it. So, and she didn't really like cooking,
Yeah.
but my father, on the other hand, did like to cook. I think he tried to teach her to cook, but he tried to teach her to cook in his style. He came
Hmm.
from an Irish Welsh family. And so he was a meat and potatoes guy all the way through. And my mother's family was not that way at all.
Wow. And so the stuffed cabbage recipe, those were dishes that you were getting from your aunts and your grandmother, is that right?
That's right. So when I was growing up, it was always a big adventure to go to our family reunions. My mother's family would have family reunions maybe once or twice a year in the Detroit area. My mother grew up in the Detroit area and she came from a Catholic family. So there are a lot of cousins. There are a lot of children in her family, 7 kids, plus my uncle, who was basically adopted by my grandparents. And when they came together, oh my goodness, the aunts would bring these big pots of things and trays of cookies called kiflis, which are like little cookies that might have poppy seed or apricot filling in them. Very buttery pastry. And my aunt Flay would bring big pot of Gretchenbrot, which is stuffed cabbage. And my Aunt Sudi might bring a big tray of lasagna, which is not Romanian at all, but still it was pretty darn good.
It's delicious.
Delicious. Yeah, and my uncle Louis was a chef, and he sometimes would come over and simply destroy my mother's kitchen. He would make a fried bread called placinta, and he would also make lasagna, and he would make dumplings. I mean, he would just go wild. And when he left, there would be so much food and the kitchen would just be full of pots and pans. My mother would have to clean for days. So if my mother got out, she would make, when my father was home, she would make, pot roast and potatoes. And on Fridays, since we were Catholic, we'd get fish sticks and macaroni and cheese
Hmm.
because, you couldn't eat meat as Catholics on
Right, on
Fridays.
Fridays.
So that was my recollection. And I have to say, as a child, I didn't necessarily love that very pungent Romanian food. It was different from anything that my mother was cooking. So to me, it was kind of weird. But now that they're all gone, and I think that's possibly why I was searching for those recipes, is because all those aunties and uncles and my mother are no longer with me, physically on the planet anyway.
Yeah. Mm. I'm wondering, have you had Romanian food recently? Like, if you had it today, do you think that you would enjoy it, or do you think it would take you back to childhood? How do you think you'd feel?
I don't know. It's funny because when we were talking about doing this podcast, I started thinking it would be interesting to do something because I don't eat very much meat anymore. And, I kind of eat in the Bay Area way now, lots of fresh fruits and vegetables. And I started thinking about what would be interesting to make a vegetarian stuffed cabbage and what would it taste like, you know? So I don't know, kind of curious about trying that at some point.
Hmm.
There are other things like chicken paprikash, which I've had, which is a delicious chicken dish. Kifli, I have made myself, and I love the kifli. So yeah, I have tried them and made some.
Okay. Now, what is kifli?
It's a little cookie. It's like a little tiny crescent pastry, and it's made with a buttery dough, again, filled with usually sesame or poppy seeds and often a fruit filling, like an apricot filling. And then, the little crescent is rolled up and very, Usually you might see them at Christmas time or Easter time.
Sounds delicious.
Yeah, it is delicious. Yeah, one of the things my uncle used to make this placinta, which is it's like a flatbread, but he used to stuff it with ricotta cheese.
Ooh.
Or cottage cheese sometimes. And, I was thinking, well, that would be an interesting thing to try to make.
Mm-hmm. So the foods that you were searching for present day, maybe as a child you weren't as into them. In childhood, what foods did you enjoy? Like, did you enjoy the macaroni and cheese and fish stick situation?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I was a very plain eater. And so that suited me just fine. I ate a lot of peanut butter sandwiches.
Uh-huh. No jam?
No jam. Plain peanut butter. And my drink of choice was strawberry Nestle Squick.
Ooh, you're taking me back. When was the last time you had a fish stick, Marna?
You mean like a Mrs. Paul's fish stick?
Is
one of those?
Is that I don't even know the name of the brands.
Yeah. It was Mrs. Paul's when I was a little girl. And then later when we got fancy, it was Gordon's fish sticks.
I remember the commercials.
Yeah.
Yeah. My grandmother was having no fish sticks in her house. So I was lucky enough to get on Fridays. My mom and dad and I would go to McDonald's and we get the fish sandwich at McDonald's. And that was a lot of fun.
I like the fish. I have to say, I like the fish sandwich at Filet of Fish.
Yep, filet of fish. When was the last time you had a filet of fish?
Oh, you mean at McDonald's?
Yeah, I mean anywhere. Where else do they sell them?
I can't say that I remember offhand. If I see fish and chips on a menu, I'm tempted.
Yeah,
I'm tempted.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, do you plan on, is there anyone else in your family who may have any of those recipes?
Possibly. Yeah. My sister back in Michigan is, in touch with a number of the cousins, and they may have some of those recipes. So that's something. What I was going to say, though, was an interesting thing that I sort of discovered about my mother while writing this essay is my mother's family was very, very poor when she was growing up. And all the kids, except for my mother, grew into they grew into adults who loved to cook. My aunts loved to cook, and they would cook for their children and their grandchildren. And they were all just very loud and just raucous, crazy people. And I thought it was so interesting that my mother had this very different relationship with food than any of them. And I realized, I think in many ways, her growing up poor and hungry, and she was always a petite, small person. I think not eating and not having a very strong relationship with food was a way that she protected herself. That, she would always talk to us, to her daughters, who we also were kind of like our aunts, very loud and boisterous and loved to eat. She would say, oh, you girls, you eat too much, you're too fat, you've never been hungry in a day in your life. And
wow.
So when I was writing this, I was thinking, I think she was really affected in a very profound way by hunger and not having enough in her early life. In addition to the fact that she probably she just didn't have the gene. She didn't have the cooking gene.
The cooking gene.
Yeah. I say in the essay, I think she would have been a really good accountant. I think she would have been good running an accounting agency. She was very good at keeping track of money, again, probably from her childhood.
That's right.
And making budgets. And I think that was something that she really enjoyed doing. But the cooking part, as she grew older and she was by herself in the house, she pretty much lived a life on peanuts.
Wow.
Planters peanuts and a few grapes in the refrigerator and some lean cuisine. This is my mother. She was 5'2" on a good day, 90 pounds, and she would eat lean cuisine.
Wow.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. So talk about food and grief. I think she had a lot. I think she had a lot of that in her.
Absolutely.
In her soul. when she was
Yeah.
growing up.
Do you think she would have recognized it as grief?
I don't know. That probably would be too touchy-feely for her.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe she wouldn't want to acknowledge that. I think she would just think it was being practical.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where was she in the Sibley line?
Oh, that's a good question. I think she was the fifth.
The fifth out of how many?
Well, seven natural children and one adopted child.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
So one of the middle children.
She's a middle child, and she always told stories about how there was one bed for the kids, and they all had to sleep in that one bed, boys and girls, until the boys got too old, and then the boys had to go sleep out in the living room on the couch or the floor or whatever. But she said that they would sleep, one would be sleeping with his head up on the pillow and the other would have his head down at the bottom, so everybody's sort of sandwiched in there. And, she talked about how they used to chase after the trains that went through Detroit and pick up coal that fell off.
Oh, wow.
So that they could heat their house with the coal. Yeah. So they definitely had some hard times.
Mm-hmm.
And for my grandmother and grandfather to feed all those kids, I'm sure it was a struggle.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I just think her relationship, not wanting to have food, not cooking, not loving food, I think for her it was a survival tactic.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
A protection mechanism to just,
Mm-hmm.
if I don't want it or need it, it doesn't matter if I have it or not.
Mm-hmm. But thank God my aunts didn't have that.
That's right. That's right. You had some of that good food.
Yes, that's for sure.
Did your dad ever cook? Or was it like the traditional, dad goes off to work and mom does everything else?
Well, one of my memories is that around Thanksgiving, he loved to make the stuffing. So he would, get out the bread, the special bread, and he would chop it all up and season it just like he liked it seasoned, and, 2 days before Thanksgiving. And that was like one of his big things. He loved that. Yeah.
Was it a proper stuffing that he stuffed in the bird? And do you have that recipe?
No, but it was very simple.
Okay.
It was just really bread, onions, sage, marjoram, oregano, thyme, the Thanksgiving spices.
Right.
And he used a good bread. It was not the Wonder Bread. It was a Pepperidge. The brand of it was called Pepperidge Farm bread. So it was like a white country bread, but it was very dense, great for toast. It had all those little crevices for the butter to melt into. Then he would stuff it into the bird and, put the heel of the bread inside the turkey to hold it in there. Yeah, it was the real deal. Not too fancy, but it was delicious. Mm-hmm. It was very juicy when it came out.
I bet
so
it was.
Very nice wet stuffing. He didn't do the dry stuffing. He did the wet stuffing. I don't remember. I'm sure he did cook other things, but I sure don't remember him doing it. He could make a good gin and tonic though. Oh. Yeah. I don't know. Food is a wonderful thing. And I think you were talking with my son about that. I think when we were on our walk, you guys were talking about the different foods that he remembered from his childhood. And I can't say it was particularly creative with him either, but he was a little bit like me. He was a picky eater. So we had a lot of broccoli, a lot of salmon, a lot of carrots.
So he liked his veggies.
He liked his veg. He did like his veg. That was good. What about you? I mean, when you were growing up, what were the foods?
Well, first of all, I was insufferable. I was so picky as a child. Sometimes textures really gross me out. Like fried catfish, I'm okay with, but not sauteed because it just is a little too slimy for me. So I loved vegetables as a child. I'd eat all the vegetables and all the rice on my plate, but a chicken drumstick, fat and the gristle and the skin, I just couldn't do it. I just couldn't. Ugh. I really disliked a lot of meats as a child, and it was really just because of the gristle and the fat. Well, for one, my grandmother would cook gumbo often. You cook it so long that the meat falls off the bone. So I I don't really have to worry about some of the textures that I disliked. And one of my favorite things, I would drink ice cold milk with my gumbo. It sounds disgusting when I say it now. But you know, my grandmother, so my parents and I lived with my grandmother for most of my childhood. And so it was often like, you know, meat, rice, and some sort of veg. So sauteed cabbage or, you know, cooked zucchini. My grandmother, probably as a byproduct of her childhood and maybe not having running water, you have to cook the veg until it's mush just to make sure all the bacteria is dead. So I remember the first time I had like just slightly cooked zucchini. I'm like, what is this amazingness? Because I was so used to mushy vegetables. And on the rare occasion that my parents and I would eat upstairs in our apartment, you know, my mother was not the best cook. Also, she was German and Irish. And so meat and potatoes, right? You know, steak and a baked potato. Who needs broccoli?
Right, right, right.
But my mother wasn't a cook. She went to the convent straight out of college. So she never really learned how to cook. So we would eat TV dinners. I've been thinking about buying a TV dinner, a Salisbury steak dinner. Just, I don't know, kind of in honor of her, just to taste it again. And I have yet to be able to do it. That they were disgusting to me, and I think it a little bit makes me sad. like, and I don't mean to be judgmental. I am a self-proclaimed food snob. So like, this is no shade to my mother. It's all just me tasting things outside of my childhood home and being fascinated with the world of food. So no Sade mommy, but like that she thought that was food. It breaks my heart that an entire multiple generations of Americans and like people today still eat TV dinner. So I'm not trying to talk shit, but I do live here in the Bay Area. We have such amazing access to fresh fruit and vegetables. I'm very spoiled.
Right.
And it just really makes me sad. I don't remember liking it as a child. So I think it's also a bit of the emotional piece of like my mom. I feel like I'm being very unkind. My mom's sister did not like when I talked about my mom's cooking skills. I think she thought I was being unkind because my father's family just throws down, and you know, food was such a part of my childhood. You go all out for Christmas and Easter and every Sunday, right? Like,
know,
the priest would come over after church and my grandmother would be cooking any number of things.
Well, you know, maybe like similar to how my mother, like that just wasn't in your mother's wheelhouse.
It really wasn't. Her sister, my Aunt Jo, she didn't really talk about her family a lot, which again, just compared to my father's family it's just such a disconnect because all we do is talk about our family on my father's side. And there was a void there. I used to ask my Aunt Joanne, like, what was dinner like? What I remember, like the gist of it was like dad would come home and mom would put the food on the table and they would eat. And then their mother was a nurse and she would go, and she worked the night shift. So they would eat and then she'd go to work. I'm like, did you guys talk? She's like, no, not really. What? You know, we can't not talk at the dinner table. And so it's like, did you ever watch Mad Men?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. So there's a few scenes on that show that I felt like I had a emotional resonance with after Betty, the wife, has their kids. And it was like, put the kid in the room and close the door. And now we can enjoy ourselves. Like children were not a part of the family. They'd go on vacation and they'd send the kids off. And that was the feeling I got. Like when I saw that on the show, that reminded me of the way that my aunt would talk about their childhood home. Children maybe were a nuisance and family was a condition. So yeah, they ate steak and potatoes a lot. That was also my Aunt Joanne's favorite meal, steak and potatoes with a salad with lots of ranch dressing on it.
Mm-hmm.
We must say, like, people from the South just have a different relationship with food in general. So my dad grew up eating, my Aunt Ophelia would have called it mush, basically just cornmeal with hot water, kind of maybe like a porridge or one step below malto meal or something like that.
Right, right.
But once they no longer had to work as sharecroppers, and the kids were getting jobs, and they came out to California, they had more access, and so food was a whole situation in our family. We all nerd out on it. We love to eat it. Everyone talks at the same time. You don't hear anything. It was a festival at the dinner table. And so it's just very different than the feeling of being upstairs with my mom and dad and eating this TV dinner. It's not a festival.
No, but I have to say, I love the Swanson's fried chicken TV dinner.
You cannot miss with fried chicken. I think we have a consensus.
It'll have mashed potatoes with little chopped up carrots and
peas,
something else. I don't remember what the vegetable was.
And when they have like the dessert would be like this apple.
Oh yeah, always an apple thing.
Something.
Next time I go to Safeway, I'm gonna be looking for that thing. So.
I know. I think me too.
No, I know what you mean. It does make me sad in the same way. Like a lot of the recipes that my mother cut out were recipes from Cool Whip labels. And I was looking at the Cool Whip label and I could not believe what I was reading. Yeah. There is nothing dairy at all. I mean, they call it a non-dairy dessert, but what it is a chemical dessert. And that was what women were feeding their kids.
While smoking their cigarettes.
And it did make me sad. They were swallowing the corporate line, hook, line, and sinker, back in those days, and not paying attention to food labels, not thinking, well, I'm sure they thought it was nutritious in some fashion.
Yeah, it was quick and easy, and it was probably marketed as healthy.
Yeah, probably.
It was just a different time. There were not a lot of food regulations.
When you go to the grocery store and look for that fried chicken TV dinner, go and look at Cool Whip is still huge in the frozen food section. Still loads and loads of Cool Whip being sold.
I'll just say, certified food snob. So making your own whipped cream. Oh my God. I made that last year for Sean and my Aunt Barbara's birthday. It was I could eat it all the time. I think it's not just that it's delicious, it's that it's fewer ingredients. It's real food. So it just tastes amazing.
And it's not hard to make.
It's not hard to make.
For your listeners who'd like to make their own whipped cream, the secret to that whipped cream was that you put like a tablespoon of sour cream in for about a cup of your heavy whipped cream, and you mix that sour cream in with it, and your whipped cream will last for hours and hours and hours. It won't fall. So put a little sour, not a lot, just put a little sour cream in there. You'll be happy with the result.
And I do want to circle back to your mom's Toll House cookies. That recipe is solid.
Solid recipe.
It's a solid recipe. Like you cannot go wrong with those cookies.
That's right. Yep. I used to get 2 of those cookies in my lunch many days of the week. And then a lot of times she would default and we'd get ho-hos or ding-dongs or the Hostess. But I preferred the chocolate chip always.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so are there any last things that you want to share about this experience of, opening your mom's food folder and not finding food?
Well, I think, your podcast is about, recipes for grief. And it did make me sad that my mother wasn't able to have maybe the kind of life that she would have been more suited for.
Yeah.
I think she loved being a mother. I know she loved my father, but I really do think she probably would have been a great career woman. And it made me sad, that she did not have that in her life, and that she was expected to cook and clean and raise the family and take care of the budget and do all that stuff. Probably could have had a great life outside of that too. It made me sad.
Absolutely.
So, yeah. I wasn't sad that she didn't really cook for us. That was okay.
Yeah.
That was
fine
okay.
With your ding dongs.
Yeah. I was sad about that. And I think I was a little bit sad that she never really could bust out of feeling like poverty was just around the corner, you know? So, yeah. So anyway, I miss her.
Would you be willing to tell us your mom's name?
Yes. Her name was Mary. Well, I think her baptismal name was Maria. Her middle name was Aurelia. Her family name is Ratiu, Ratiu, which is really a bastardization of the family name because they came over on the boat. And then people who were doing the books at that time over on Ellis Island just heard the name Rats and they wrote Ratiu. But I think the Romanian name is Ratz.
Which generation was it that came over? Was it your mom's parents, your grandparents?
Yes, my grandparents came over around World War I. They wanted to get out of the Hungary. That area of Romania went back and forth between Hungary and Romania, especially during the wartime periods. Basically, my grandfather was a draft dodger. He did not want to fight in the war.
Yeah, who could blame him?
I don't blame him at all.
The last question that we ask each guest, knowing that we carry our grief in tandem with our love and our joy and our memories, what is your life recipe for tending grief? How do you deal?
I mean, grief is so funny. I mean, after the worst parts of grief, after you lose someone, when there can be a lot of wailing or withdrawal, and you go on with your life, it's funny how it just pops up at odd times. And just a little thing will remind me of a family member or a friend that's no longer around. And I guess what I like to do is to just sit in that moment for a while and think about them and think about good things about them and just kind of carry them into my day and talk to them sometimes. I do a lot of talking to my people that have passed. That's what I do. I'm sure people have all kinds of different ways. If they're coming up to me in the realm of grief, then I feel like it's time to make a connection. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Do they ever talk back?
Oh, sure they do. And they come to me in my dreams. Especially my sister Jenny. She comes to me in my dreams quite often, and she's always healthy, beautiful, and we always have nice conversations, which was not true when we were growing up. We fought a lot. So we made our peace before she passed, and I'm glad to say that in my dreams that peace is still there.
That's really lovely. Marna, thank you so much for sharing this time with me. I really appreciate your stories and your laughter. This has been really lovely. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
Thank you for listening to Recipes for Grief. You can find more information about today's guest on the podcast page of your player, as well as their recipe card that's available on my website, AndreaSextonDumas.com. That's AndreaSexton, D as in donut, UMAS.com. If you'd like to share your recipe for grief, leave a 3-minute voicemail at the following number, and your message may be played on a future episode as a listener shout out. That number is 510-426-6041. That's 510-426-6041. Find me on Instagram and TikTok at Recipes for Grief. And now, here's a little advice from my grandmother.
Life isn't easy. You just have to make the best of it.